The Bacardi mansion rose from the heart of Santiago de Cuba in the late 19th century, a monument of limestone and coral stone carved from the island's own bones. The sun poured over its facade like molten gold, but inside the light was different. It filtered through colored glass and heavy velvet curtains, breaking into fractured tones that crawled across the tiled floors. The scent of sugarcane and sea salt mixed with the faint bitterness of alcohol aging in oak barrels beneath the house. Every corner hummed with quiet tension, as if the walls themselves remembered too much. It was Don Facundo Bacardi, the family patriarch, who had built it, not merely as a home, but as a symbol. To the people of Cuba, he was the innovator who transformed rum from a rough spirit into liquid art. But to those who knew him intimately, there was something restless beneath the refinement. A mind consumed by precision, haunted by the island's instability and his own ambition. In his study, lined with ledgers and faded maps, he would work late into the night, his hands trembling slightly as he wrote. Servants whispered that sometimes he spoke to the empty room, not in prayer, but in conversation, as though the house were listening. When the revolutions came, the mansion became more than residence. It was fortress, refuge, and sometimes prison. The great hurricane of 1899 struck the city without warning, tearing roofs from homes and uprooting trees by their roots. The Bacardi mansion stood defiant, its stone walls moaning under the wind's assault. Inside, the family gathered in the grand hall by candlelight. Lightning illuminated their faces, the children's eyes wide with fear. Don Facundo's wife, Amalia, clutched a rosary so tightly it left indentations in her palms. And somewhere deep within the foundation, the rum barrels groaned and cracked as if crying out from the depths of the earth. When dawn finally came, Santiago lay broken, yet the Bacardi estate remained standing. But the family changed after that night. Facundo's oldest son, Emilio, claimed to have seen something through the window during the storm. A shadow on the terrace that moved against the wind, human but silent, watching. For weeks afterward, he refused to enter that wing of the house. Servants avoided it too. The air there felt colder, heavier. Even the candles sputtered and died too quickly. As the empire grew, so did the mansion. New wings were built. Italian artisans arrived to paint frescoes of angels and vines along the ceilings. Yet the beauty seemed to conceal something hollow. Visitors described the strange stillness in the corridors, the echo of footsteps that continued long after one had stopped walking, and always at dusk, the same sound, the faint dripping of water where there were no leaks, like the rhythm of an invisible clock counting down towards something inevitable. It is said that when Don Facundo died, his funeral was held in the main hall of the house, surrounded by the rum barrels that had made his fortune. As his body lay in state, the scent of oak and molasses thickened the air until it became almost suffocating. When the coffin was finally closed, the candles flickered out one by one, extinguished not by wind but by something unseen. That night, the servants swore they heard footsteps in the distillery cellar long after everyone had gone to bed. The sound of a cane tapping against the stone floor. 3 slow steps. A pause. Then 3 more. The mansion had begun to keep its own time. Years passed, and with each generation, the Bacardi mansion seemed to absorb more than it gave back. Emilio Bacardi, the eldest son, inherited not only his father's wealth, but also the strange burden that lingered within the house. A man of letters and quiet conviction, he devoted himself to Cuba's independence and to the people who revered his family name. Yet even as he worked for freedom beyond its walls, something within the mansion bound him still. The locals whispered that the Bacardi home stood on a crossroads of old ground, a place where blood and salt had mingled for centuries, long before the first stone was laid. The exterior remained majestic, white columns gleaming against the Cuban sun, wrought iron balconies laced with ivy. But behind those iron gates the light shifted differently. It fell in shards across the marble, highlighting specks of dust that floated like ash in stagnant air. The sound of the city never seemed to reach fully inside. Even the cries of street vendors faded at the threshold, as though the walls absorbed all noise and kept it locked within. Emilio tried to modernize the mansion, to breathe life back into it. He filled its rooms with paintings, sculptures, and rare books collected from across Europe, yet the new beauty could not conceal the undercurrent of melancholy. The servants spoke of strange happenings, the piano in the music room playing faintly at midnight, though its lid was closed, the scent of cigar smoke drifting from the empty study, the portrait of Don Facundo, whose eyes, they swore, shifted ever so slightly under candlelight. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Emilio held a gathering for visiting dignitaries. The chandeliers burned bright, their crystal droplets trembling with each thunderclap. Laughter filled the grand hall, wine glasses clinking. Yet behind the opulence there was tension, a feeling that the house itself resented the intrusion. As the storm raged, one of the guests, a Spanish ambassador, excused himself to find the washroom. Minutes later he returned pale and trembling. He claimed to have lost his way in the west corridor, where the air grew colder with each step. He had heard whispering, voices speaking in low tones in a language he could not understand. And when he reached the end of the hall, he saw a woman standing by the window in an old-fashioned dress, her back turned, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. But when he blinked, she was gone. The next morning, the ambassador left the city. He never spoke of that night again. As years turned to decades, the mansion became a witness to Cuba's turmoil. The rise and fall of revolutions, the shifting tides of power, the exile of those who once ruled. The Bacardi family fled, their empire divided, their home left behind like a wounded monument. Dust settled over the frescoes, vines clawed their way through the cracks, and the silence deepened. Those who dared to enter after the family's departure described a house frozen in time. Half-drunk glasses of rum still sat on the sideboard. A book remained open on Emilio's desk, its pages curled and yellowed. The clocks had all stopped at the same hour. 3:17. Some believed that was the moment the last Bacardi crossed the threshold for the final time. Others whispered that something in the house had willed it so, that it did not want to be forgotten. At night, passers-by claimed to see faint lights moving through the upper windows. The faint flicker of a candle, the outline of a man with a cane, or the silhouette of a woman drifting past the balcony. No one stayed long enough to be sure. The Bacardi mansion had become something more than stone and memory. It had become a living echo of its own past, a house where history refused to die. The scent of rum still lingers there, heavy and sweet, like an offering to whatever remains inside. By the mid-20th century, the Bacardi mansion had become a relic of its former grandeur, a silent observer of the storms that reshaped Cuba. Its marble steps, once polished daily by servants, were dulled by dust and the slow erosion of neglect. The great iron gates creaked with age, their hinges rusted, and the scent of salt and mildew seeped into the stones. Those who passed by said the house seemed to breathe, a slow, heavy rhythm, as though its walls expanded and contracted with the damp Caribbean air. Yet inside the stillness was absolute. Time had thickened there like syrup left too long in the barrel. Emilio's descendants, scattered across the world after the revolution, rarely spoke of the mansion. Some referred to it as a curse, others in hushed tones as La Casa del Silencio, the House of Silence. Still, its existence haunted them. Old photographs surfaced occasionally, a family gathered on the grand staircase, their expressions stiff, unsmiling. The children holding crystal glasses far too delicately for their age. In every picture, something felt wrong, an imbalance of light, a shadow that didn't match the others. Experts examining the archives decades later noted strange inconsistencies, as if portions of the images had blurred not with time, but with motion, though no one had moved. When the new regime took power, the mansion was seized and repurposed. Officials spoke of transforming it into a cultural institute, a museum of heritage. But the renovations never finished. Workers complained of constant electrical failures, of tools disappearing overnight, of doors that refused to stay closed. One foreman reported hearing music one evening, an old waltz echoing faintly from the grand hall, though no one had entered it in years. He followed the sound, his flashlight flickering across the peeling murals and broken chandeliers, until the melody stopped. In the center of the hall, beneath the dusty chandelier, he found footprints in the dust, small, barefoot, leading toward the locked cellar door. When he tried to open it, the handle burned his palm as if it had been heated from the inside. The next day he left the job without collecting his pay. The cellar had always been the heart of the Bacardi estate, where barrels rested, aging in the damp darkness, their contents sealed away. After decades of abandonment, those barrels still remained. When one of the inspectors dared to open one, the liquid inside had long evaporated. Yet the scent of it filled the air instantly, overpowering, intoxicating. It lingered for days. People began to say that the rum itself had soaked into the house, that its spirit, once a symbol of celebration, had turned bitter within those walls. Locals kept their distance, but children from nearby neighborhoods would sometimes sneak into the garden. They described hearing whispers beneath the floorboards and seeing faint figures behind the curtains. A girl claimed she saw a man in a white suit standing by the second-floor window, holding a glass, staring into the distance. When she pointed him out to her friends, he was gone. Only the faint clinking of glass remained, echoing down the corridor like the final toast of a vanished era. In time, vines overtook the balconies, the sea winds eroded the plaster, and the Bacardi crest above the entrance cracked down the middle. Inside, the mirrors tarnished to bronze, reflecting only shadows. Yet somehow the air inside remained scented with oak and sugar, as if the house itself refused to forget what it once was. By the 1990s, the mansion had become a forbidden landmark. The government locked its gates, citing structural instability. But locals knew better. Night guards rotated every few weeks, none stayed long. They spoke of footsteps pacing the upper corridors, doors slamming on windless nights, and of a soft rhythmic tapping. 3 steps, a pause, then 3 more, echoing from the cellar below. Every ghost story is rooted in something human: grief, guilt, memory. And perhaps that was all the Bacardi mansion was, a monument built not to wealth, but to the weight of history itself. A house that remembered more than anyone wanted it to. When the century turned, the Bacardi mansion stood like a scar on the edge of Santiago, beautiful, immense, and utterly still. The palms that once swayed gracefully along the front avenue had grown wild, their roots cracking the stone path that led to the main entrance. The air carried the salt of the nearby sea, mixing with the smell of damp wood and faint rum, a scent so deep in the walls that no time could erase it. Locals avoided walking past after dark. They said the mansion had moods. Some nights, it seemed to breathe with a calm sadness. On others, its windows gleamed like eyes watching the street below. Inside, dust lay thick as velvet across the furniture. Curtains hung heavy with age, their patterns faded into ghostly outlines. Yet despite the decay, the house retained an eerie dignity. In the main hall, the grand staircase still curved upward like a frozen wave, its railings carved from mahogany darkened to near black. The stained glass above the landing, once a brilliant depiction of the Bacardi bat, wings spread against a rising sun, now glowed only faintly, colors dulled, the bat's face cracked through the center. When sunlight struck it at a certain angle, the reflection bled across the marble floor like red wine. In 2003, a small restoration team was sent to survey the structure. They arrived early one morning carrying cameras, notebooks, and measuring tools. The air inside was thick, still, and unnaturally warm despite the sea breeze outside. Every step echoed too long, the sound folding back on itself. One of them, an architect named Morales, noted that the temperature dropped sharply as they moved toward the eastern wing. In his notes later found in the archives, he wrote, "It feels like walking underwater. The air presses down. We heard something metallic, like chains swaying, but there is nothing here that could make that sound." They reached the study, the room where Don Facundo once planned his empire. The desk remained, though warped with age. His quills still rested beside a cracked ink bottle. The air reeked of iron and sweetness. Morales took a photograph of the desk. When developed, a faint silhouette appeared in the corner of the frame, a man's outline near the window, blurred as if half-formed. The others saw nothing that day, but none of them returned after nightfall. That same week, a historian from Havana requested access to the Bacardi archives. Among the family's personal letters, she discovered a fragment written by Emilio in 1908. "The house feels wrong since father's passing. The rum does not taste the same. The walls weep when the rains come. I hear him pacing at night. I cannot tell if I am dreaming. The letter was never sent. It was around this time that the legend of El Guardian resurfaced, the supposed spirit of a man in white who appeared whenever anyone disturbed the mansion's rest. The stories dated back to the 1920s, when workers claimed to have seen him standing near the cellar entrance, his expression unreadable. Some believed he was Don Facundo himself, doomed to protect what he had built. Others said he was someone forgotten, someone the family had buried too quietly. Whatever the truth, the restoration was abandoned after 3 weeks. The official reasons cited unstable foundation and safety concerns. Unofficially, the workers refused to continue. One man, interviewed years later, said he saw shadows moving against the light, as though the darkness itself had a shape. Another said he heard a woman singing softly from the upper floors. When they searched, the room was empty, the dust undisturbed. After the team left, the government sealed the mansion again. Only a few researchers were granted entry, and even they stayed only in daylight. Cameras placed in the halls captured strange distortions, bursts of static, flickers of movement that no one could explain. In one frame, a chandelier swung gently, though the air around it was still. Outside, the vines kept growing, pulling down the balconies one by one. The mansion was no longer a monument to success, but a mausoleum of memory. And yet, through the silence, the faint scent of rum and oak continued to drift through its corridors, a perfume of the past, impossible to destroy. Whatever had taken root inside the Bacardi mansion, it remained, watching, waiting, remembering. By 2010, the Bacardi mansion had become an enigma surrounded by silence, a ruin both revered and feared. From afar, it appeared almost majestic again under the tropical moonlight, its silhouette rising like the skeleton of an ancient cathedral. But up close, the illusion broke apart. The balconies sagged beneath the weight of creeping vines, the shutters hung loose from their hinges, and the faint scent of decay mixed with something older, sweeter, the ghost of aged rum that still seemed to pulse from the stones themselves. The city had changed, yet the mansion remained fixed, as if it existed outside of time. It was that year when a small documentary crew arrived from Spain, hoping to capture what they called the forgotten heart of the Bacardi Empire. Their intention was historical, to explore the origins of the family legacy and the rise of their empire from within those walls. But the tone of their film would shift long before the first interview was recorded. The director, named Ramirez, noted in his journal that the moment they stepped through the main doors, the sound changed. Their microphones picked up faint static, like distant whispering, and the air pressure dropped. "It feels like entering a cathedral built for something long dead," he wrote. Their first day of filming focused on the grand hall. Dust floated in beams of sunlight slanting through the cracked windows, moving like ash suspended in water. The crew worked in near silence, their footsteps echoing. Then, while recording a slow pan of the staircase, the cameraman noticed something odd through his lens, a brief flicker of movement at the top of the stairs. He rewound the footage later that evening, replaying it frame by frame. There, just for an instant, was the faint figure of a man in white, half-turned, the outline of a glass in his hand. When the next frame appeared, he was gone. The team dismissed it as a trick of light, but the unease deepened. Equipment failed inexplicably. Batteries drained within minutes. At night, while reviewing sound recordings, they discovered layers of faint noise beneath the ambient hum, a low rhythm like slow breathing, punctuated by soft tapping. 3 steps, a pause, 3 more. Always the same pattern, as if something unseen moved beneath them, pacing the cellar in time with their own heartbeat. On the 3rd night, Ramirez decided to sleep inside the mansion, hoping to capture ambient footage in the dark. He set up a static camera facing the grand staircase and another in the study, near the window where Emilio once wrote. The rest of the crew stayed in a nearby guest house, uneasy with the plan. By morning, when they returned, the director was waiting outside, pale, trembling. He refused to enter again. On the footage they later recovered, the house appeared silent for hours, until 3:17 a.m. The clock on the wall, frozen since the 1960s, began to tick. Then faintly, a voice whispered something indecipherable in Spanish. The temperature reading on the camera dropped sharply, and just before the battery failed, a figure passed briefly before the lens, a shadow without a body, gliding across the marble like smoke. The documentary was never released. The production company cited technical loss of data, but those who had worked on it refused to speak publicly. Years later, fragments of that footage surfaced anonymously online, blurred, distorted, but unmistakably real. Experts dismissed it as manipulation, yet the sound remained. The slow, rhythmic tapping echoing from below, recorded clearly enough to chill even the most skeptical listeners. After that, the mansion was sealed once more, its gates locked, its path overgrown. But some say that at night, when the wind shifts and the sea air carries through the streets of Santiago, you can still hear faint strains of that tapping in the distance, 3 steps, a pause, 3 more. As if the house itself continues its eternal pacing, restless beneath the weight of everything it has seen. The Bacardi mansion no longer belonged to any dynasty. It had become something else, a memory of memory, suspended between history and haunting. Its walls no longer echoed with voices of the living, but with the endless replay of what once was, trapped in the thick air of a house that refuses to die. In 2015, the Bacardi mansion stood like an island of darkness amid the growing city, its facade mottled by salt, its windows blind and hollow. Tourists rarely found their way there anymore. The official maps of Santiago didn't even mark its exact location, as if erasing it might erase what it remembered. The people who lived nearby had learned to avoid its shadow. Even the birds, it was said, never nested on its roof. When storms gathered, the lightning always seemed to strike close but never upon it, as if the house rejected the fire of the sky itself. Inside, the air was heavy and stagnant, the silence broken only by the groan of settling beams. The grand staircase had begun to split, its steps bowed and warped. A chandelier hung at a crooked angle, swaying faintly with no wind. Each object in the house seemed caught in a delicate balance, too fragile to touch, yet too stubborn to fall. The once lustrous floor tiles were cracked like a mosaic of frozen tears. Dust clung to the ornate moldings, blurring their details into shadows. It was a place frozen between collapse and endurance. That same year, a research team from the University of Havana received special permission to document what remained of the mansion before it was deemed unsafe for entry. Their goal was anthropological, not sensational, to understand how architecture preserves the psychology of power and loss. But within days, their notebooks turned from observation to confession. Dr. Isabel Leon, the project's lead historian, wrote in her field report, "The structure resists interpretation. It feels alive in the most oppressive sense. Each corridor has its own temperature, its own breath. The eastern rooms smell of sea salt and smoke, the western of sugar and wood. When we speak, the echoes do not return to us. They move away as though the walls absorb every word and remember it." On their second night, the team set up motion sensors along the cellar staircase. Around 2 a.m., one of the alarms triggered. The security footage, later analyzed frame by frame, showed a faint distortion descending the steps. Not light, not shadow, something between both. It moved slowly, like mist thickening into form, then vanished halfway down. Moments later, the air temperature in the cellar dropped by 10 degrees. One of the researchers vomited from nausea and vertigo. Another fainted outright. By dawn, they left the building without speaking. The following morning, when they returned, something had changed. The air inside the mansion felt charged, metallic. Every clock in the house, long frozen for decades, displayed the same time, 3:17. The team could not explain how. None of the mechanisms were connected to power. In her diary, Dr. Leon noted, "The house acknowledges us. It does not welcome us." They pressed on, moving toward the northern wing, where the family's private quarters once stood. The bedrooms were nearly intact. Faded fabrics still clung to the canopy beds, and perfume bottles stood on the vanities, their glass clouded but unbroken. In one of the rooms, they found a child's toy, a carved wooden horse, its paint peeling, lying on its side beside an open wardrobe. Inside the wardrobe they discovered handprints in the dust, small, recent, impossibly distinct. As evening fell, they gathered in the main hall to document their findings. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. The lights of Santiago shimmered in the distance, distant and alive. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere grew suffocating. The walls seemed to hum faintly, a vibration more felt than heard. Dr. Leon's assistant described it as the sound of the building thinking. The candles they had lit began to flicker, one after another, until the room plunged into darkness. From somewhere deep below, in the belly of the house, came that same familiar rhythm. 3 steps, a pause, 3 more, echoing through the marble, climbing upward, deliberate and unhurried. They fled before sunrise. None of them returned. Their recordings were archived by the university, but only partial transcripts survive. The final entry in Dr. Leon's notes reads, "This house does not decay. It endures. It waits." And so the mansion remained. Windows staring out at a city that had forgotten it, walls whispering to no one but themselves. Its silence had become its language, its memory, its only inhabitant. By 2023, the Bacardi mansion had become more myth than structure, a hollow monument at the edge of the city, its windows boarded, its gates locked, its name spoken only in fragments. The world outside had changed beyond recognition. The family's empire, reborn in glass towers and modern distilleries, thrived across oceans. Yet here, on the same soil where it began, the heart of that dynasty still beat beneath rotting beams and crumbling plaster. Santiago's nights grew humid and silent around it, and when the sea breeze passed through the streets, it always carried a faint sweetness, oak, sugar, and ghostly fermentation, the scent of memory. Local authorities declared the mansion too unstable for preservation. Plans were made to demolish it, to erase its remains and build a public garden in its place. But when the engineers arrived, they refused to begin. Their instruments malfunctioned. The blueprints didn't match the real architecture. Corridors appeared that no one remembered drawing, and staircases seemed to end where they once turned. Every attempt to measure its structure led to contradictions, as if the house refused to be mapped. That night, the lead engineer stood at the gate staring through the rusted bars at the shadowed facade. He later told a reporter that he heard something, faint, rhythmic, distant. It came from deep within, like the echo of footsteps on stone. 3 steps, a pause, 3 more. Then silence. He left his post before dawn, and the demolition was delayed indefinitely. Inside, time had folded in on itself. The air no longer smelled of dust, but of something sweet and rotting, like fruit left too long in the sun. The murals had peeled away, revealing older walls beneath, rough, almost primitive stone. No record existed of what stood there before the mansion was built, yet the foundation itself seemed ancient, older than the city. Some whispered that Don Facundo hadn't chosen the site for beauty or convenience, but for something deeper, something the earth had whispered to him long before the first stone was laid. During the final survey, a small group of workers entered to recover artifacts for the National Archive, documents, glassware, remnants of furniture. They found the grand hall nearly collapsed, the chandelier shattered, its crystals scattered like frozen rain. Yet the air was unnaturally still, untouched by the wind outside. On the marble floor, where sunlight cut through a gap in the ceiling, something shimmered faintly, a small silver key, tarnished but intact. No one could explain how it had survived untouched for over a century. When they turned to leave, one of the workers glanced back toward the staircase. At the top stood a man, or what seemed like one, dressed in white, tall, still. The worker froze. The figure did not move or blink, but the air between them thickened with pressure, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Then, as the light shifted, the form dissolved into shadow. They abandoned the search immediately. Days later, the key was delivered to the city's museum, labeled simply, "Recovered Object, Bacardi Mansion." That night, the museum's security system triggered an alert. The camera in the storage room captured a single impossible frame, a reflection in the glass case where the key rested. a faint silhouette of a man standing beside it, holding a glass aloft. No one entered that room again after dark. Weeks later, a storm tore across the coast, the worst in decades. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the hills, and when morning came, the Bacardi mansion was gone. No flames, no debris, no smoke. Only the foundation remained, washed clean by rain. Where the grand staircase once rose, there was only an impression in the earth, like a print of something vast that had lifted itself free. Today, that plot of land is overgrown. Children play there, unaware of what once stood above them. But when the wind passes through at dusk, some say the air carries a sweetness unlike any other. Oak, molasses, and the faintest trace of rum. And sometimes, if you listen carefully beneath the sound of the sea, you can hear the soft rhythm of footsteps pacing through the soil. 3 steps, a pause, 3 more, a dynasty born of fire and sugar, swallowed by its own memory. A house that outlasted time, not through strength but through remembrance. The Bacardi mansion was never just a home. It was a vessel, for power, for ghosts, for the lingering spirit of a family that could never truly leave the island that made them. And even now, when night falls over Santiago, and the scent of rain and rum fills the air, the city remembers. Because some houses never die, they only wait.